Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto was a hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. What? Aizen couldn't help but yell as a blade stabbed him straight through the torso. It missed his heart and any vital organs by quite a bit, but it was still a serious wound. For the first time in the entire fight, he lost it completely. He had yelled in such a voice that wasn't befitting the all-powerful Aizen Sasuke, simply because he wasn't used to being so fallible. He raised a hand to his chest and pulled it back. It was covered in blood. Aizen grit his teeth in panic, placing his hands on the blade jutting out of his chest, trying to wrench it out of his chest. He turned around to take a look at his assailant, and two things went through Aizen Sasuke's mind at that particular moment. 1. How the hell did he get the jump on him? And 2. How the hell did he manage to break his illusion? Despite his heavy injury, Naruto was on his feet, smiling cheekily as his Zanpakuto impaled Aizen right through the torso. With his free hand, he caressed the place where Aizen had wounded him. He moaned orgasmically. It's been a long time since I've felt pain like this. I know this is Haribel's aspect, but I'm feeling the ecstasy of sacrifice right now, where I can sacrifice my flesh to kill you. He said lowly, twisting the blade in Aizen's chest a little bit. The leader of Loss No Chase lurched in pain. But if that's all you want, then I'll be happy to take this wound for you, Naruto said. A burst of strength later, and Aizen had pulled the blade out from his chest, clutching the heavy wound and moving back from Naruto in order to get some distance between them. Naruto swung his sword to the side, clearing the blood from the blade. He held up a finger to it, feeling the life fluid with his own hands. He closed his eyes, wistfully satisfied. You look confused, Naruto said, as Aizen finally looked serious. I take it you're not very used to confusion, are you? You honestly didn't think I would try to fight you with only 2 layers to my plan, did you? Especially when they were as unsecretive as they were. But I added another layer to my plan, one I created even without the help of Sail, Naruto explained, pointing to one of the devices on his chest. Your illusions are your ace in the hole, but I noticed that there was a bit of a similarity in your Kyuka Suigetsu's illusions, and a very particular type of illusion I experienced in life. Naruto held up an index finger, and it glowed with orange Ryatsu. He put his hands together, holding them out in front of him, the orange Ryatsu glowing from both of his index fingers. It seemed to resonate with the devices all over his body. Tendrils and wisps of chakra rose from the ground, wrapping around Naruto's midsection. The devices glowed ever brighter. Your illusions work similar to something called genjutsu. Using your Shurikai's special ability, you disrupt the opponent's 5 senses using the flow of Ryu-Ryoku. There was a technique that I used in life that broke genjutsu, but unfortunately, chakra doesn't translate to Ryu-Ryoku very well, so I needed to develop a similar yet different technique to cancel out the illusions. I spent the last several years honing this device while all 3 of you were away in Soul Society, simply because then you would hardly be able to keep reasonable tabs on me. It's safe to say that I now have the ability to channel my Ryu-Ryoku just as well as chakra. And that. Naruto gestured to a certain spot. It was where Aizen had put up an illusionary version of himself, while the real him stood safety off to the side. That is, safely until he had gotten stabbed. I've already cancelled that illusion you set up, and pretended to fall underneath your trap. And, I'll dash. Don't fucking bother, he roared at the end of the statement, putting his hands together and channeling his Ryu-Ryoku again. The scene before him went hazy for a moment, and the shapes in front of him began to distort and blur. When the illusion had ceased completely, the wounded Aizen was farther away from him, and he was holding a familiar orb in his hand. The air of panic that had overcome him briefly was no longer hovering over him. Naruto could tell he was forcing it. I'll commend you for your effort, Naruto. In all my experience as a Shinigami, I would have never expected anyone to have the determination and tenacity to work out such a plan. However, you may be able to beat me as a Shinigami, But what would happen if I raised my status? Aizen said slyly, opening his shirt. Naruto could hear the sound of muscles tearing as the wound Naruto inflicted widened. He let go of the Hogyoku, allowing it to float towards his chest. A loud squelching noise could be heard as the orb nestled its way into Aizen's chest, and the gashes around it began to glow with a deep purple Ryatsu. The Hogyoku is beginning to respond to my thoughts, Aizen said. Naruto noted the slightest hint of desperation in his voice. He didn't understand the meaning behind his words though, but he had the impression that it was a bold-faced lie. You don't know? I suppose it's understandable. Not even I knew about the true power of the Hogyoku until I became its master. Someone who has never held the Hogyoku in his own hands will never be able to understand it. Aizen looked up at Naruto. The Hogyoku has a will of its own. You seek the Hogyoku for its ability to remove the boundary between a hollow and a Shinigami, but that is not the only ability of the Hogyoku. Its true ability is to grant the desires of whoever controls it. The Hogyoku began to glow brighter, and Aizen seemed to be exerting himself a little bit, even after he had just implanted the Hogyoku in his chest. Aizen was forcing the Hogyoku to respond to him, given the nature of how his Ryatsu increased at such a high rate. Since the Hogyoku can respond to the desires of whoever wields it, naturally, it can separate the gods. He trailed off, as a crushing purple Ryatsu washed over the area, and what appeared to be liquid hollow mask began leaking from the Hogyoku. It was a little different than that, however. From the mortals. The material began to solidify underneath his robe, jutting out and flanking his shoulders in a tree branch shape. More of the material hung off his robes near his feet, but Naruto noted that Aizen was looking more like a hollow. Naruto fired a bala laser in his direction, but Aizen avoided it deftly and darted towards Naruto. His Shuunpa was definitely greater than Naruto's Sonido at the moment, whereas before it had been slower. He angled his blade forward in a stabbing motion, though Naruto held his own Zanpakuto horizontally, one hand on the hilt and another near the tip, which allowed him to solidly block Aizen's stab. You're careless! Naruto shouted, redirecting Aizen's blade to the side, before slashing his shoulder and head 3 times in quick succession. Aizen staggered, but never lost his smile, as only a few seconds afterward, the white canvas was now covering the areas where Naruto had struck. Regeneration! Naruto shouted, flashing away to get some ground. You're right, I was careless. Of course, there is no meaning in me being cautious anymore. Aizen taunted, appearing before Naruto quickly. He struck Naruto's chest with his hand, creating a shallow cut. Naruto's arrow prevented a deeper wound. Aizen noticed this, as Naruto was still able to retaliate and drive Aizen off. More, it's not enough, Aizen muttered to him, as the Hogyoku in his chest began to pulsate violently. His Ryatsu grew even heavier, and the white material that covered him expanded even farther. He's getting more and more desperate, and he's doing things he would never do in his normal state. Maybe it's all the stress that is getting to him, he's lost one of his commanders, and he still has a war to fight. Naruto thought to himself. Idiot! Naruto muttered to himself, reappearing on the ground. The Hogyoku is beyond your understanding, Naruto. Since I am its master, I can use my power to evolve without limit, whenever I have the desire to do so. Aizen said. His voice had gotten more mysterious, and with an echoic quality to it. He was standing in mid-air, covered head to toe in the white canvas that only covered a few spots before. His eyes were solid, crystalline mauve orbs that resembled their source. The Hogyoku was still embedded in his chest, being the clear source of all this. The chrysalis stage is the next level on my ascent to godhood. Aizen proclaimed, floating down dramatically to the ground. Naruto rushed him at that moment, placing a second hand on his Zanpakuto before swinging it in a wide arc at Aizen. Aizen didn't blink, and instead his hand shot out, the palm meeting Naruto's sword. He pushed the sword away, nearly jarring it from Naruto's hand in the process. The Arrancar stumbled in place, allowing Aizen to push forward and stab Naruto right in the shoulder. Naruto winced, their roles were being reversed again. One of his anti-illusion devices fell off of his chest, and he retreated back, clutching his wound. While my movements are filled with careless movements because of triviality, yours are becoming filled with carelessness due to a desperate necessity. Your mind in turmoil, and as a result your attacks will continue to become weaker until they are mere child's play. Aizen said, looking down upon the ragged Naruto. I thought I told you to shut the fuck up. Naruto muttered, to which Aizen stared at him blankly. Naruto was getting to his feet again, but that was not what was concerning Aizen at the moment. Naruto continued to attack, and Aizen blocked and parried every single strike with an absurd amount of ease, Naruto's speed and power not being able to put a dent in his defenses. The portal that led to Karakura town, which had remained opened during the entire conflict, was beginning to ripple. Aizen turned around carelessly, his purple eyes watching the portal with disinterest. It's not quick enough, Aizen said, his voice becoming slightly more agitated. Naruto still wasn't down for the count yet, and he grew tired of the chrysalis stage quickly. He raised his white-covered hand, before he struck the Hogyoku with it lightly. He released more and more Ryatsu, and the ripples made from the Hogyoku's energies increased. I will end this chrysalis stage here now, and make myself move on to the next stage. Naruto watched on in awe as Aizen's Ryatsu continued to increase, and the Hogyoku began to cycle the former Shinigami out of his chrysalis stage. The white canvas that covered Aizen's entire body began to crack, and pieces of the shell fell off, revealing a new and improved Aizen. Now that he was out of the shell, Aizen could take a look at the scene using his own eyes once again. Though, there were some noticeable changes to the way he looked. His hair was longer, and his eyes had turned gray with a purple scara, and the Hogyoku was still embedded in his chest. Not to mention, his Ryatsu was palpable, much stronger than his Shinigami self. The Hogyoku was throbbing in his chest. His Zanpakuto had fallen to the ground during his transformation, and Aizen plucked it out of the ground, quick as a flash. He held it aloft so that the wounded Naruto could see his demise. This battle is over, Naruto. Prepare to meet your demise, he said, walking slowly but surely towards Naruto. Naruto was still in suitable enough condition to fight, but he didn't make his move. He watched Aizen proceed towards him slowly, and he looked down at his Zanpakuto. He then looked over to the side, where Ulquiorra stood. The other Arrancar's eyes were opened slightly more than normal. By Ulquiorra standards, that meant he was amazed by Aizen's new display of power. He looked over to Haribel, who seemed to be staring at Aizen in awe, her blade still pressed to Jin's neck. Jin was looking as calm as ever. He sighed, before he scratched the back of his head. After that, he pointed his Zanpakuto out in front of him, and it began to glow red. Aizen looked on with a considerable amount of interest, before he spoke. Oh? You're going to use it, after all? I'm honored. Naruto ignored him, his Ryatsu increasing as he focused on his blade. His left hand was situated on the hilt, pointing the blade horizontally. He placed his right hand underneath the cutlass on the back end of the blade. He closed his eyes, allowing the Ryatsu to flow into his cutlass. His eyes snapped open, and he sneered at Aizen. He let go of his blade, allowing it to hover in midair, before he hit the hilt of his blade with his right hand. The blade twirled in midair, glowing a brighter red, before Naruto shot his hand out with deft agility and grabbed the Zanpakuto. Kill! He was cut off by a wave of Ryatsu. Deep purple Ryatsu was pouring off of Aizen's body in waves, and from the look of things, he wasn't the one who was controlling it. The Hogyoku was emitting a loud hissing noise, and the glow it was giving off was a hot white instead of a deep purple. Naruto's eyes widened. He put his Zanpakuto down, the red Ryatsu from his Zanpakuto release fading. Aizen seemed to be just as shocked as Naruto was, he truly didn't understand what was happening to him. I don't understand. How? This. The new god managed to get out. Naruto didn't really understand either, until the implication hit him at full force. It seemed to hit Aizen at around the same time. Aizen forced the evolution. Naruto's expression took on an eerie, apathetic calm, and he shook his zanpakuto before sheathing it. Slowly, he took one last glimpse at Aizen, before he turned his back on him without another word. "What's happening? Where are you going, Naruto?" Aizen roared out, grabbing the Hogyoku on his chest, trying to force it to stop. Naruto didn't turn around. "Is there any need for me to answer that? You're the god here, figure it out for yourself." Naruto muttered, as Aizen roared in pain as the Hogyoku rejected him as its master. Ulquiorra watched the display happen with stunned silence. It was like their roles had reversed. For once, Naruto was the calm, collected individual, while Aizen was the raving madman. The Quinta Espada knew all too well what this meant. Naruto no longer acknowledged Aizen. "I'm not about to answer someone who didn't even realize that the Hogyoku doesn't recognize him as its master." The white canvas that once surrounded Aizen broke off, and his purple and gray eyes faded to their normal color. His hair once again shortened, and Aizen saw his true flesh once again. "Doesn't recognize me? That can't be," he continued to yell. "I know. The Hogyoku never recognized you as its master in the first place, and you just continued to force your evolution. The Hogyoku just got tired of it eventually. That's impossible. I knew what the Hogyoku's will was telling me. You're just a mere hollow, you know nothing. Your life is meaningless, you have no purpose without me. All of you." Naruto finally turned around to face him, a slight glare on his visage. Overall, he still looked particularly disinterested with Aizen's downfall. "You were always afraid of me, Aizen. Afraid of what I could become. I know why you're so desperate to evolve to your precious godhood. All of your basic Shinigami skills were at their highest level of what you could achieve. And me, you knew that my basic skills were already above yours, and I would continue to grow stronger. Without forcing your evolution, you would fall behind me." Aizen had stopped yelling, but he was still breathing heavily, a look of intense hatred directed at Naruto on his face. His body was starting to deteriorate from the Hogyoku's influence. "Uzumaki," he managed to shout out. "Aizen, you're pathetic," Naruto said, once again turning his back on Naruto. Aizen cried out in pain, desperately trying to drag himself to his feet and stop the Hogyoku. In response to that, the Hogyoku whirred and hissed, and the smell of burning flesh entered the air. Aizen's body began to glow with the white-hot energy that the Hogyoku was producing, and the brightness of the whole display forced the onlookers to shield their eyes. The Hogyoku popped out of his chest, but it hovered in midair directly in front of Aizen, a white stream of Ryatsu connecting the two of them together. It gave one final burst of energy, and that was the end for Aizen. There was another burst of heavy Ryatsu and a quick flash of bright light that temporarily blinded Naruto. When his vision had returned to him, Aizen was gone, reduced to dust by the rejection of the Hogyoku. The Hogyoku itself clattered to the ground, now dormant. Naruto allowed a smile to play upon his face, and he chuckled. His chuckling quickly turned into full-blown laughter, as he walked up to the spot where the Hogyoku had fallen. He whistled after he picked it up. "Well, I'll be damned. It really does have a will of its own, after all. Good thing I'm not going to be using it like Aizen," Naruto said to himself, pocketing the orb quietly. "Okay, that's enough Evrio," he didn't finish his sentence, as he noticed a clear lack of an important presence in the room. Aizen and Tosen were both dead, and that left only one Los Noches commander to deal with. Though it seemed that Jin had managed to sneak his way out of Haribel's grasp. Brief flash of light. He was nowhere to be found after that. Where? Oh, never mind, he's not important, anyway. If he ever shows his face on this scene again, he will be no match for us. Ulquiorra! Naruto suddenly called out. Ulquiorra stepped forward. Yes, Naruto. Close that portal up. Sail should be done with it. It's too early for us to meet the Godii 13, and if we stall long enough they'll be able to come after us. I'm going to take Neutra down to the desert and see if our little weapon is a success or not. Ulquiorra nodded, before Naruto nodded to Haribel. She seemed a little bit confused about where Jin had gone, but that wasn't important right now. They had other concerns. "If we're lucky, we'll have a whole new weapon at our disposal," he said, before he flashed away. Ichigo just destroyed another building within Las Noches, making it a total of 7 different structures he had destroyed on his path. No one who observed the scene knew why the Mad Vizard was destroying everything. The hollowified human roared once again, and this time his roar was tinged with a strong ryatsu. He didn't know what he was looking for, but it called for him to protect it. There came a flash of movement, and Ichigo's attention was drawn to a figure who seemed to be hovering in midair, an object pointed at him. Ichigo pointed his sword over there dumbly, but he was too late. "Licked Regan!" Ishida shouted, standing directly above the hollowified Ichigo and letting forth a stream of blue arrows that resembled a heavy rain. Ichigo roared as they fell on him, but when the dust cleared it was apparent that they had little to no effect on him. Ichigo had no arrows stuck out of his body, they had all just bounced uselessly off of his armor. He swung his sword in Ishida's direction, the simple wind of the swing knocking Ishida out of the air. Before Ishida could attack, Neliel had flashed underneath his guard, her lance poised to attack. She thrust it forward like a drill, but like the arrows, it uselessly struck Ichigo's protective armor. She gasped in pain as Ichigo threw away his sword, and grabbed Neliel around the neck. His speed was unbelievable for such an unwieldy body, and his fingers were stronger than she could ever imagine. Already she could feel the life getting squeezed out of her the harder he pressed. The Centauran Arrancar was lifted off all 4 of her feet, and they all kicked against Ichigo's chest. Ishida had fallen some feet away, and he was getting to his feet frantically. "Let go of her, Kurosaki! What do you think you're doing?" Ishida cried, rushing to Ichigo's aid. Ichigo noticed the noise, and with his free arm, levitated his sword to his hand. With a quick flick of his wrist, the sword went flying towards Ishida, burying itself in his hip. The Quincy spasmed in midair as the sword propelled him backwards while causing a great deal of injury to him. Neliel painfully turned her head to the side, regretfully watching the Quincy go down. "No," she thought to herself. Behind Ichigo's mask, his eyes glowed with a golden yellow, and it made his visage look all the more evil and sadistic. Still, there was a hint of mindlessness behind the whole thing. He didn't know what he was doing. Neliel felt her bones begin to crack, and began to wonder about this situation. How powerful was Ichigo's hollow side, where he could grab her, a former espada, by the neck and begin choking her as if she were no less than an ordinary human girl. She coughed, desperately searching for breath, and closed her eyes while awaiting the release of death. When it never came to her, and the pressure began to lift from her throat, she tentatively opened her eyes again. An orange glow was surrounding the human turned hollow. Ichigo released his grip on her neck, allowing her to plummet to the ground, where she began sucking in air. Ichigo's animalistic roars had declined to become a calm, relaxed growl. Neliel's gasping had slowed to a halt, and she looked over in surprise behind Ichigo, where the source of the orange, glowing barrier stood. Inu Orihime was healing the crazed Vizard. A look of intense determination was set upon her face, even in her worn-out state. Her hands were held out in front of her, and the control of her Soten Kishun was at its strongest. She made a slight grunting noise, as Ichigo stopped moving completely. The tips of Ichigo's horns began to break off from the rest of Ichigo's body, and they disappeared, like they had never been created in the first place. Neliel looked down, noticing that Ichigo's hollow body was disappearing right before her very eyes, and his familiar human flesh was resurfacing underneath all of the armor. His mask cracked and disappeared, showing his actual face once again. He was still conscious, though he seemed exhausted. His hair had shortened back towards its original length. Neliel sighed in relief. They had avoided a great crisis. She pondered the effects of Orihime's Shun Shun Rika abilities, and noted how lucky they were that they were effective against Ichigo. It was probably because of a combination of Orihime's will, and the fact that Ichigo was distracted with her. If Orihime had attempted to heal him head-on while focused on her, she probably would have failed. The orange shield faded, and Ichigo collapsed onto the ground, fully back in his human form. His clothes were completely tattered, but he got to his feet, panting heavily. What was I doing? Neliel sighed in relief, and a smile played upon her lips. Orihime, however, couldn't contain her own relief. Tears of joy threatened to spill from her eyes, and her hands shook at her sides. Kurosaki-kun, she blubbered, rushing over to the tired Ichigo. Neliel watched in satisfaction as Orihime embraced the bewildered Ichigo, even as he awkwardly patted the crying girl on the back. "So, are you finally back to your old self, Kurosaki?" came another voice, who seemed to wince from the pain of speaking. Ishida had limped his way over to the scene. He was clutching a heavy wound at his side, and with his free hand he was holding Ichigo's zanpakuto, which was covered in his blood. Ichigo released Orihime. "Ishida, you're..." He trailed off, noticing Ishida's wound, and the zanpakuto in his hand. "Did I?" he said, trying to find the words. Ishida smiled, and looked away from Ichigo. "Don't worry about it, it's nothing. A lot worse would be at stake if I took pity from you," he said, putting on a tough guy facade. He walked over there, standing in front of Ichigo and Orihime. A flash of silver, and then blood was rushing from a vertically bisected Ishida. The two halves of the Quincy fell down, the smile still on the bifurcated halves of his face. Ichigo and Orihime gasped, and the latter's hands flew to her mouth in shock and horror. Ichigo had gotten to his feet, his exhaustion completely forgotten, and beheld the two new arrivals. Neliel turned around quick as a flash. She knew that strike from anywhere. There came a loud cackle from behind the company, and the crescent-shaped blade that had sliced Ishida in half retracted, coming to its owner. Noitra Gilga stood directly opposite the group, with Naruto Uzumaki standing directly behind him. Noitra had clearly been the one to kill Ishida, and Neliel figured they should be thankful that Naruto had not entered the fight yet. "Ishida-kun!" Orihime cried out in alarm, summoning her power in a desperate attempt to heal him. Noitra shot out his crescent blade once again, and the two fairy-like beings hit the edge of the blade. "Really? Such a disappointment. Your hollow form had so much potential, but if it can be dispelled so easily then I have no interest in it," Naruto said, walking up to fall into line alongside Noitra. "Anyway, I thought I should bring news to you guys. Aizen Sasuke is dead," he said bluntly. All three of their eyes widened, and Naruto relished in the excitement. "Still, I wouldn't celebrate if I were you. Even if you guys did invade, Aizen at least saw a purpose in both of you. I, on the other hand, have no use for any of you now. I was thinking I would just kill the lot of you right here," Naruto said casually. Neliel glared at the Primera Espada, and immediately got in between Naruto and Ichigo. She had showed a pitiful display earlier against Hollow Ichigo, but she would protect her friends right here by killing Naruto and Noitra. "Ichigo! Orihime, run," she said. Ichigo got to his feet, and with some hesitation picked up his sword out of Ishida's cold, clammy grasp. Naruto looked at Neliel in amusement. "What are you saying, Nell? I can't let you fight them alone," he said, rushing to her aid. He found out that his body was in no condition to fight at the moment. "Ichigo, thank you for bringing me this far. Without you, I would have never regained my memories, and I would never have remembered about what must be done. But you have already achieved your objective. You have rescued your friend, and that is all that needed to be done. Your battle has ended." She paused for a moment, and Ichigo looked contemplative. "I know you want revenge. Naruto has caused the deaths of 3 of your friends. You have every reason to want to kill him, but you must think about Orihime first. You must get her to safety by whatever means are necessary. Even if you cannot escape back to the human world, run. Far away from loss, no chase." Ichigo cast a look downwards, before Orihime placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and he nodded. "Thank you," he whispered. Turning his back to Neliel, the 2 human teenagers ran in the opposite direction at the best speed the exhausted Ichigo's body would allow. Neliel smiled in relief, looking at her friends one final time. Her look shifted to one of anger and determination, as she beheld the two rival Arrancar staring her down. Naruto grinned. "Sacrificing yourself to buy time, huh?" he asked, watching the two humans get farther and farther away. "She's not going to be sacrificing herself," came a loud voice from somewhere in midair. Naruto frowned, and Neutra looked up, but two figures, one large and fat, and another one tall and skinny, fell from the sky and landed right next to Neliel. "Pesh! Dondo Chaka!" Neliel shouted, half in relief and half in worry. Naruto looked bored. "They're like bugs," Neutra commented. "Frachin' trash." "Oh yeah, like that's going to make a world of difference against us," Naruto said sarcastically. Pesh narrowed his eyes at the two Arrancar. They were the mortal enemies of Nel-sama. "We are worlds beyond that of our old selves, Naruto. Due to the increasing threat these days in Huecomundo, we had to become much stronger in order to protect Nel-sama. And now that her memories have returned to her, the time in now," he said, holding a strange, glowing blue Zanpakuto in his hand. Dondo Chaka pulled out a spiked club from his mouth. "Pesh! Dondo Chaka!" Neliel said. "I know what you're going to say, Nel-sama, but this is a battle for all three of us. All three of us were wrong that day so many years ago, and the time to extract vengeance is now. With our combined strengths, we will defeat both of them right here," Pesh said, determination staining his voice. Neliel shook her head, and twisted her lance in her hand before she smiled. "No. I understand, you too," she said. Neutra cackled. "This is fucking perfect. We're all reunited for another battle." It was 3-on-2, but it was two current Espada versus one former Espada and two former Frachin. It was clear who had the advantage. "I could finish this all by myself, but," Naruto said, "I want to focus all my attention on you," he said, directing his attention on Neliel. He drew his Zanpakuto from its sheath. Neliel felt a rock drop in her stomach. Despite being Naruto's Frachin at one point in time, she had never seen him release his Zanpakuto, or even use it in battle. He pointed his Zanpakuto towards the sky, before bringing it crashing down towards the earth. A line of force moved its way towards Neliel, distracting her from Naruto, who was moving in for a strike. Neliel just barely got her lance up in time to block his attack, but Naruto was pushing the offensive, and the two combatants slid away from the scene. Naruto looked up from the battle. Ichigo and Orihime were far away now. Neutra looked miffed at not being able to fight Neliel, but focused his attention on her two former Frachin. "This won't take long," Naruto commented, looking back at the scene. Pesh was gargling up blood already, Neutra having administered a heavy wound to his torso. Neliel looked shocked as Neutra followed up with another attack, thrusting his Zanpakuto into Pesh's chest. A fountain of blood erupted from his chest, and Dondo Chakra rushed towards his aid. He suffered the same fate as his friend, having his strange tiki-like mask caved in from Neutra's Zanpakuto. Neliel felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. They weren't able to survive those attacks. Pesh was already lying in a puddle of his own blood, and Dondo Chaka's face was crushed. She screamed in pure, righteous fury, flashing away from Naruto. In her rage, she forgot the opponent she was supposed to be fighting, instead focusing all of her anger on Neutra. She would avenge her dead friends. Neutra looked surprised at the speed of her Sonido, getting up his Zanpakuto to block. He didn't know if he'd be able to survive this oncoming attack. It didn't help that she was released and he wasn't. She never got the chance. After Neliel had rushed Neutra in a fit of rage, Naruto himself flashed away at a much greater speed. He got in front of her, completely underneath her guard. He raised his Zanpakuto skyward as Neliel halted in her advance. Orange Ryatsu gleamed on the end of his blade, and the full power of that Ryatsu burst forth. An orange wave washed over Neliel as Naruto slashed down with all the force he could muster. The move completely cut Neliel in half, and continued to slice through the ground after that, creating a fissure that cut through the sand for several hundred feet. The bisected Neliel turned her head one last time. She didn't even register what had happened, but she knew there was one more thing she had to make sure of it. She thought right before she died. Good, they were still running, just little specks on the landscape now. The fake Karakura town was silent. No humans were around in the replica that Soul Society had constructed for the inevitable battle between Soul Society and Huecomundo. The town stood silent and unmoving. Then, all of a sudden, there were flashes of high-speed movement throughout the skies of the replica town. Figures leapt off of buildings and off of the streets too, jumping into midair. They were ready for combat. And they were all there. 13 captains, 11 vice-captains. The greatest fighters that Soul Society had to offer stood in the skies of the human world, waiting with bated breath for the storm. Many members of the Konoha Association were there, at least the ones that held captain or vice-captain rank. They were all concerned. Kakashi had entered into Huecomundo on his own, and they hoped he was still alive. Whether or not he returned alive would be the deciding factor on whether or not they took action. And so, they waited. They waited and waited for their opponents for the battle. Many hours passed, but there wasn't a single ripple in the sky, no gargantas or portals that would signify the arrival of Aizen and his ilk. The 24 combatants stared down the hypothetical place where they would appear, but there was something off here. Las Noches never showed up. Naruto sheathed his sword, his Ryatsu fading. Neliel's skin had already faded to a pale pallor, and her eyes were wide open and blank. His attack had split her in two entirely, and she was dead before she even hit the ground. Naruto frowned. He was very satisfied with the kill he had just performed, and Neliel has been a thorn in his side for far too long. However, there was something else that bothered him. Naruto placed his finger on the ground and opened up his pesquisa. He narrowed his eyes, focusing in on the two humans that were trying to escape. They were far away, and would escape at this rate. Not to mention, he couldn't pinpoint their exact location, and only managed to get a grip on a general area. He lifted his finger and sighed. Now that he knew Kurosaki's hollow side could be controlled by his allies, those two were almost non-factors. They were little to no threat to him if his hollow side was something he himself couldn't control. Not to mention, they didn't know how to use Garganta, so they couldn't escape to the real world and give away valuable information. At best, they would only be capable of living a vagrant life in Huecomundo with all the other hollows. He looked over. Neutra had already finished off her two ass-kissing fraction. He was looking towards him for instructions now, as he knew along with the other Espada that it was time to make preparations for war. The first thing we need to do is abandon this old palace. Whether or not the Shinigami have Garganta, we know that the invaders came to Huecomundo particularly close to here, via the Garganta of Urahara Kasuke. We don't know if Urahara will make amends with Soul Society soon, but it's something we need to be prepared for. Neutra frowned at Naruto. We're not ready to take on the Godai 13 just yet. Almost all of Soul Society's power lies within its captains, and without the former 3 commanders, we're low on power. In addition to that, it's 10 Espada versus 13 captains. We're outnumbered, and 1 or 2 of our members are not up to par with even the weakest captain Soul Society has to offer. Before we declare war on Soul Society, we need to have every single Espada operating at captain class or above. Naruto said. He paused for a moment to breathe and continued. We also need to complete Wonderweiss ability, and get into contact with our reserves in Eastern Huecomundo. Even if we somehow defeated the Soul Society, the Spirit King is necessary to the plan, and the Royal Guard is stronger than the Godai 13. Those reserves will be pivotal in our second battle if we are to take the Spirit King's head. Where are we going? Back to the Reno Animal Palace? Neutra asked. Naruto shook his head. No, that kingdom is dead and buried. Nothing will come of reviving that failed experiment now. I've given up on being a king. The Reno animal wasn't strong enough to destroy Soul Society, and I became too concerned with governing. No, Barragan may still hold on to the idea that he's still a king, but I've moved on. I'm no longer a king, I am a military commander. Naruto listened to Naruto, not really caring about the whole thing. If they had to move, then they had to move. There seemed to be no way around this. We leave as soon as possible. Ulquiorra is already closing up the portal to Karakura town. That place is no longer important. The only thing I need to do now is inform the other Espada of the relocating procedures. The lower-level Arrancar will follow their superior's lead. Naruto didn't say anything, but Naruto had already turned his back to him, so he couldn't see his reaction. So, where are we going, then? Naruto asked, finally speaking again. Naruto halted, bringing a hand to his chin as if to ponder the question. He hadn't decided on an exact location. He would have to recover some items that he left back at the Reno Animals Palace, but that wouldn't be his base of command. I'll tell you later, but for right now I'm going to call a meeting of the Espada. Aizen was the supreme commander of this place, but that has all changed. There isn't a rank greater than the Espada now, and we're going to have to make some decisions that haven't been up to us before. Naruto said. The Espada meeting hall had a new look. Without Aizen calling the shots or the meetings, it was the first time where he was not already present right at the start of the meeting. So far, 9 of the Espada had already taken their designated seats at the table. Most of them already knew what was going on, but there were aspects about Naruto's course of action that not even Ulquiorra knew. Well, we might as well get this over with, came Naruto's voice, as he walked down the hallway alone. The 9 lower-ranking Espada turned to look at him. Naruto smirked, and walked right past the head of the table where Aizen used to sit. He ran a hand over it as he walked, feeling the smooth material. He then took the second seat on the right, sandwiched in between Grimmjow and Haribel. I guess I'll just say the most obvious news right now, Aizen Sasuke is dead. He proclaimed. There was a resounded silence, and the only person who really showed a visible reaction was Zamari, who had already been given time to blow off steam when announced of Aizen's death. The rest of the Espada had already been briefed about this, and had accepted the news. Secondly, and more importantly, is what we are going to do now. With Aizen gone, that means that I'm taking control of our armies from this point on. Granted, I am the highest-ranking Espada and most of you were already my subordinates before, and have known about the plan for a while now. Therefore, I shouldn't expect much resistance from you on this matter, okay? Naruto said casually, putting a hand on his cheek. His eyes flickered over to Baragon. Naruto narrowed his eyes. That guy was being shockingly submissive about this matter. What is he up to? Naruto thought. Just because Naruto and Baragon had similar downfalls and similar grudges against Aizen did not mean they weren't enemies. Baragon probably saw no different in him leading than he did with Aizen. The other Espada who weren't a part of his kingdom didn't seem to have any objections. However, he knew one of them would raise a ruckus with the next thing he said. He turned to Yami. Oh, yeah. Yami. You're being demoted. He said sweetly, a big, gaping grin on his face as the look on Yami's face went from bored indifference to dumbfounded stupidity. He blinked for a moment, and Naruto thought for a moment that he was just going to sit there in shock, and the inevitable explosion wasn't going to come. What? Oh, there it is. Did I fucking stutter? You're not the Zero Espada anymore. Naruto said. Screw you. Who the hell put you in charge around here anyway? Just because you replaced Aizen-sama doesn't mean that I accept you as our leader, he roared. Naruto closed his eyes, and he grinned, showing sharp teeth. He didn't seem to care before that. However, it wasn't him who spoke next. Yami, do you understand why you were given the position of Zero Espada? Ulquiorra asked. Naruto opened his eyes, and his grin got wider. There wasn't a single person in Las Noches that Yami respected more than Ulquiorra. Naruto had formed a Zero underneath the table, but it looked like he didn't need to use it. Yami breathed out heavily, before turning to Ulquiorra. Aizen gave you the position of Zero Espada not because of your abilities, but because of your potential. You are the only Espada who can conserve Ryoryoku by sleeping and eating, and allowing your power to build up over time. In addition to that, your resurrection increases your strength and Ryatsu as you become angrier. Essentially, you have the potential to increase your strength and Ryatsu without limit. However, there are certain drawbacks towards this power. 1. Building up your Ryatsu via either sleep or anger to truly powerful levels takes an extraordinary amount of time before you battle, and as such it is never feasible for practical combat. You have never built up your strength and Ryatsu to true Zero Espada levels. 2. Your resurrection only grants an increase in physical strength. You lack the dangerous combat abilities of the rest of us. Do you understand what I'm saying? Ulquiorra explained. Yami looked lost, and Ulquiorra sighed. Basically Yami, you have the potential to become the strongest of us, but your power and methods are so horribly inefficient it almost doesn't matter. Such an inefficient Arrancar is unfit to hold the rank of Zero Espada, and by extension rule over the army. In fact, right now, in your unprepared state, there is no doubt in my mind that everyone else at this table could defeat you in combat. He fixed Yami with a cold stare, one that was sure to wither even the strongest warriors. And in Yami's case, it succeeded. Being torn apart verbally by the Arrancar he respected the most seemed to cow him, and the other Espada knew at that moment that force was not necessary to make him accept his demotion. Well, that's settled then. There is no need to go further than that. Yami will remain at his position as the Decima Espada, but he will remain the Decima Espada in the event that he releases. The position of Zero Espada is now null and void, Naruto piped up. The other Espada agreed with him on that. Now, on to more important matters. We're relocating, Naruto said bluntly. Now that was a statement that surprised plenty of the Espada, who saw no foreseeable reason that they should move. Allow me to explain. With the 3 commanders of Las Noches either dead or missing, we are significantly down on power. We cannot hope to challenge the Soul Society at our current level of power. Soul Society's power lies almost entirely within its captains, which means that we are lacking several key captain-level fighters. We have 10 years. He paused, allowing this information to sink in. 10 years to get all of the Espada to captain level. 10 years to train to our fullest potential, and 10 years to gather our hollow forces and coordinate the plan. It's a short time, but I believe that we can manage this. He turned to look over at Ulquiorra. And finally, there's one last order of business we need to take care of. He paused for a moment before he reached into his pocket, pulling out a deep purple orb covered in a glass case. The other Espada looked at the orb carefully, and for many of them it was the first time they had ever seen the Hogyoku face to face. Usually, it was kept on a pedestal underground within Aizen's throne room, and many of them weren't Hogyoku-created Arrancar. You seem to all know what this is right here. It's the Hogyoku, he explained, picking up the ball and looking at it. Because of Aizen's recklessness, the true danger of the Hogyoku came out, and he outright killed himself because of its misuse. During my fight with Aizen, he explained the true power of the Hogyoku, and its ability to make any desire come true. But, we've seen the result if someone tries to do that with its power, Naruto said, tossing the Hogyoku and catching it in midair. The Hogyoku will continue to be used for its original purpose, and I will be the one to hold on to it. Despite this, there are numerous advancements we can make if we use this practically, and this is because of what Aizen did. What did Aizen do? Harabel asked. It's simple. When Aizen used the Hogyoku to turn hollows into Arrancar, he was limiting our potential. The Ryatsu composition of a Hogyoku-created Arrancar is 96% hollow and 4% Shinigami, and the power gained through Shinigamification was rather minuscule. Why should this be when there was such a powerful tool at his disposal? Granted, most of us here are naturally created Arrancar, but it is still possible to improve ourselves if we use the Hogyoku. I need time to sync with the Hogyoku, but when I do I can awaken our full potential as Arrancar. And what is this full potential, Naruto? Harabel asked. She seemed to take up the position as unofficial spokesperson among the other Espada. Naruto closed his eyes before he looked over to Sail. The Novena Espada nodded stoutly, before Naruto turned his gaze to look at Ulquiorra. His right-hand man was always of an interest to Naruto, for one particular reason. It's simple, really. Right now, all of us except for one are unable to use a second release. Naruto started. Most of the other Espada looked at each other. Clearly they had never heard of a second release. And this is because most of us at this point are unable to use it. With the Hogyoku, we'll be able to pass our former limits and finally be able to learn the Resurrección, Segunda Etapa. Wait. You're telling me that there is a whole, another stage of Resurrección we can use? Grimmjow blurted out, not being able to contain his emotions anymore. That's right, Ulquiorra is the only one who's been capable of achieving this state, but his existence right here proves that it's possible. The Resurrección, Segunda Etapa is essential to the invasion. With it, most of us will be able to breeze right past the average captain level strength. That seemed to get the attention of all the remaining Espada. But still, I have to sync with the Hogyoku. It's going to be some time before I'm capable of creating that second release. In the meantime, we need to abandon this palace. There is nothing of use here to us anymore. That seemed to surprise a great deal of them. I'll explain. Due to our recent invaders that have been purged, we know that it is possible for Shinigami to come into Hueco With that said, they would know that we're here. We need to relocate somewhere quickly before they decide to launch a full-scale invasion. No one seemed to raise any objections, so Naruto stood up. So, it's settled then. We will relocate our forces to our reserve base in eastern Hueco. You all have exactly 1 week to get everything you need for the journey. I will be taking that week to supervise the journey and movement of materials, and Sale's going to need extra help with his lab equipment and specimens. No need, Naruto. I already have all of my fraction working on that. Sale piped up, waving a hand haphazardly. Naruto hummed. Alright, then everyone focus on your preparations for the move. There is one other important thing that lies within Las Noches. The archives on the Shinigami that Aizen brought to Hueco. The information we have on the current captains are the most important files, but make sure that every last word of information in the archives travels with us to our new base. That's all for now. Dismissed, he shouted, bringing an end to the Espada meeting for now. As the other Espada filed out of the room, Naruto folded his hands, now alone in the room. El Libro de Ciclos was very specific on its plan, but he didn't know if something like that was really there. It seemed as if they had been running for hours, and yet no one seemed to be coming after them. Neliel's sacrifice had given both Ichigo and Orihime enough time to put a great deal of distance between themselves and the other two Espada, but Ichigo didn't believe that they'd be able to avoid all confrontation with other enemies. The landscape was desolate the entire time, though, and for that they were at least thankful. They didn't stop to heal Ichigo's injuries at any point in time. He had a sneaking suspicion doing that would only invite trouble. Orihime was keeping pace with Ichigo, but she couldn't stop herself from looking behind her shoulder every so often. Besides doing that, she would occasionally break down crying in the middle of running, when the memories of all the deaths would confront her. Ichigo almost envied her. He too wanted nothing more than to break down like that, but he knew he couldn't, for both of their sakes. There would be time to mourn later, if they could even get out of the palace. That was another thing that was bothering him. Where would he and Orihime go from here? Urahara hadn't given them any instructions on how to get back, and they didn't know how to use Garganta. No one in Soul Society was there to aid them, so they were essentially stuck in Hueco. Ichigo sighed. It was better than nothing. They, or rather he, had saved Inu after all. They could worry about what they were going to do later. He heard crying from beside him. Orihime was breaking down again, and as a result she didn't really look where she was going. The sand parted underneath her feet, and before anyone knew it, she had fallen down a pitfall trap. She screamed clumsily, and Ichigo stopped in his tracks, a bead of sweat rolling down his face. His eye twitched suddenly, and he found himself at a loss for words. There was a thud, and a high-pitched "ooh" from the bottom of the pit. Ichigo sighed in relief and a little bit of exasperation, before he peered down the hole. Inu, he called. Kurosaki-kun, she called back. Inu, are you alright? Yeah, I'm fine. I landed on my stomach, but something broke my fall, she called back. Ichigo's mouth opening slightly in surprise, before his eye twitched again. Must have been her, never mind. Anyway, Kurosaki-kun. Come down here, I think I found a better way out, her voice said from down below. Ichigo raised an eyebrow at that. What kind of pitfall trap was it if it had a way out? Inu, just stay there. I'll come down and get you real quick, he shouted down to her, jumping into the hole without any hesitation. The hole was dark, but it was significantly wide, as Ichigo could move around while he was falling quite easily. Ichigo touched down easily, his Shinigami body and the soft sand both cushioning his fall. Orihime was lying to the right of him on her stomach, looking down in another direction. Kurosaki-kun, look. She pointed in the same direction she was looking. The two humans seemed to have been deposited into an area that have caved in over time, but the other section of the underground tunnel still seemed to be intact, given the stone walls and unlit torches that lined the wall. Ichigo was reminded of the tunnel they had used when they first entered Las Noches. I'll bet if we follow this tunnel, we can make it directly outside without running into any enemies. Man, I'm glad you found this, Inu. He said, smiling lightly at her. Orihime stuck out her tongue bashfully. I'm really clumsy, so I guess that's the only reason we found this place. She said modestly. Ichigo had already gotten to his feet and crouched slightly to fit into the tunnel. Orihime dragged herself to her feet and followed directly behind him. She noticed his gait, he was limping slightly, and his breathing was slightly heavier. He was definitely still seriously injured. Kurosaki-kun, wait. Let me heal you while we're down here. Orihime called out. Ichigo stopped in place, glancing at her before once again turning back ahead. We're almost out of here, just wait a little while longer. I can feel it, I've been getting so sick of this place, he roared, pushing himself to go on. Orihime stared at him in awe, until a few minutes later they could see an opening at the end of the tunnel. Ichigo picked up speed after, and when they finally breached the opening and came out underneath the Huecomundo moon he collapsed onto the sandy ground almost immediately. Kurosaki-kun. Orihime shouted, thinking that he was injured. Ichigo simply hummed at her, thoroughly content to just lay there in the sand. He didn't even flinch when he felt an orange triangle surround his body, and a warm feeling spread throughout his inside. So, what do we do now? Ichigo asked the question that was on both of their minds. Orihime continued to heal him, despite the fact that a thoughtful look had entered her face. She had finished healing him, and the orange triangle faded. Ichigo flexed his hand by instinct, and his Shinigami robes had recovered fully. He got up from his lying position and sat on the sandy floor. Well, we're stuck here for the time being. He trailed off. Orihime seemed to grasp the implications of what this meant, but there was one other thing that her mind was focusing on. Stuck here, with Kurosaki-kun, she thought, as she unconsciously turned a beet red. Ichigo noticed this. What's wrong? He asked. That brought her out of her reverie, and she shook her head violently. Nothing, just nothing. Everything's great. Ichigo continued to look confused, and Orihime dropped her head. We don't know how to use Garganta, but... He trailed off, looking up into the sky at the Huecomundo moon that hung over the two of them. It gave him a strange feeling. I've saved you, even if it was at the cost of all my friends. The war is still going to go on, but I've been beginning to feel that it doesn't matter now. We've lost everyone, so I almost don't even see the point of returning now. You feel the same way, don't you, Inu? He asked, in a rare moment of seriousness. A wave of depression washed over him, and tears pricked at the corner of Orihime's eyes. Slowly, she nodded. I sort of feel that we can't go back now, that doing so would be an insult to their memory. But, whatever the case, we're stuck here now. We have to make the best of our new lives here, and see if we can cope with the death of our friends, he finished. Once again, Orihime nodded in silent agreement. The two of them were lost souls now. They didn't have anywhere to go, or anywhere to go back to. They had no goals, no purpose, and no future, and in a way they only brought this fate on themselves. It was going to be a long life, but that was all they really had. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.